You are Sauron, are you not? I'll serve you then, whoever you are.
Welcome back, everyone. This will be my full Lord of the Rings of Power Episode 5 video. There are a whole bunch of Easter eggs and references, so we'll break it all down. If you're brand new to the channel, I'm doing videos for all the episodes. Be sure to subscribe to get them. Careful for spoilers from the episode if you haven't seen it yet. We'll start at the beginning and work our way through shot by shot, talking about Easter eggs and WTF moments. Starting with the episode title, Partings, it's a reference to the splitting of all the main groups, the Númenóreans who go to Middle-earth, the Southlanders who leave the main group and bend the knee to Sauron and Adar. It's also a book reference to The Return of the King, Chapter 6, which is also called Partings, where the Fellowship all heads off in different directions, temporarily because eventually the story brings them all back together. And that's kind of what's happening towards the end of Season 1 as well. Like the Southlanders, who were broken apart, will eventually meet again, because the war's basically going to cover the last 2 episodes of Season 1. The actual opening scene is with Nori and Meteor Man explaining the nomadic history of her people, the Harfoots, and all the places that they travel to season, Winters and Old Forest, which is actually really close to where the Shire's eventually going to be. The Hobbits are their relatives biologically, but the actual Hobbits don't show up in Lord of the Rings until after the Third Age. Most of the other places that they mention are new places that they created for the show, but they're just part of this area of the map. Like they show you their journey along the map, and they do this every single year. The whole thing with the Harfoots is it's meant to be a stark contrast to the Hobbits, who basically stay in the same place. Like, they all stay in the Shire. That's a big thing during the Lord of the Rings books and the Hobbit, that the Hobbits do not leave the Shire, as opposed to the Harfoots, who do nothing but leave. Like, they spend all the time going all over the place. Meteor Man's language is getting better. He's starting to understand basic concepts in their language. The whole thing with him not understanding the concept of death until recently, I think supports the idea that he was part of the Maiar before this. Like, he could be one of the wizards, the Istari, who are like a subgroup of the Maiar. Later in the episode, he seems confused by the damage to his physical body when he defends the Harfoots. I think the whole idea is that he's just getting used to occupying this physical, mortal body. One of the big deals with characters like Gandalf, the other Maiar who walk around in human avatars on Earth, is that their powers are severely limited and their bodies are exactly that. They're mortal bodies. They can be killed. But as you saw during the Peter Jackson movies, when they die, they're essentially just reincarnated, like their spirits live on. That's how powerful they are. They're like cosmic beings that for brief periods are trapped in mortal bodies, walking around as avatars. But that's probably why he's so powerful and why he's so confused about the physical damage to his body, and why he accidentally winds up hurting Nori. Like, he's just not used to walking around in this mortal body. During this early conversation, he also reiterates that he's good. That could be a misdirect, but I think the whole idea is that they're meant to give him a very Gandalf kind of vibe. Like, he's meant to be a good character, but does a lot of really scary, very terrible things. Like I said, the whole thing later in this episode, they want to show him being a little bit darker. I also think that's meant to be a misdirect, and it's just the idea that he just isn't used to operating in this physical body on the mortal plane. But ultimately, he does want to help the Harfoots, but he does have this grand mission that he's on, like the star chart that he's following, trying to find the place where Mordor, Mount Doom will eventually be. That's why throughout their journey, they show him staring at the stars more and more, as if he's still plotting his course using the constellations. Like, everybody in the story is slowly converging on this place in the Southlands where Mordor is going to be. The Númenóreans are there, the Orcs are headed there, and the Meteor Man is eventually headed there. One of the other classic Tolkien things that they try to add to this scene too with the Harfoots early on is that they have Nori's friend Dilly singing a song. And one of the big things that differentiates Tolkien from other fantasy literature that's derivative of Tolkien or was inspired by it is that there are a lot of songs in Tolkien's stories. Maybe if there were like 20 episodes in season 1, you'd have more songs. They even end the episode on another song. The one that Dilly is singing early on is meant to be a metaphor for Nori and Meteor Man's call to action and their true purpose to find Mordor based on his star chart that he created. It'd also be a metaphor for Halbrand, for Galadriel, the Númenórean characters who are heading to Middle-earth. This big call to action from everyone is also happening with the Southlanders too, because Arondir is trying to give Bronwyn and Theo this big call to action. The Southlanders who stayed at the tower, you need to hold out. Like, they're setting up a very Two Towers, Battle of Helm's Deep situation in the last 2 episodes, where you have this really small group of people holding out against this insurmountable force of orcs, waiting for reinforcements. And just like in Helm's Deep, like Gandalf came riding in with reinforcements, they have a wizard who's on the way to help, and also reinforcements, but coming separately from 2 different places. I'm sure when we get to the last 2 episodes, there'll be a bunch of Helm's Deep jokes that people are telling. They reveal a brand new group of people who seem like a group of mages or magic users who find Meteor Man's crash site, and they look really evil. Like they're giving off over-the-top levels of sinister vibes. So I think this guy is just meant to be one of the followers of Sauron, like he is a follower of Darkness of Morgoth, but he's not Sauron himself. They have another scene of Adar, evil guy, monologuing, explaining his plan for the last couple of episodes, and I think he basically explains the plot to us in this, like he reveals what's going to be happening the last 2 episodes. When he says soon the sun will be gone, he's probably talking about the plan that they have to blot out the sun in the Southlands area here in Mordor itself using Mount Doom. Like he probably plans to use a combination of magic maybe with the sword and an eruption from the volcano in Mount Doom to throw enough ash into the sky to literally block out the sunlight so that orcs can move about freely without fear of being hurt. And when he says that soon the part of him that felt the warmth of the light will be gone, that's also a reference to the storyline with the Mithril and the elves slowly dying out, like the light within them slowly dying out, the light of the Silmarils. But I also think when Adar is talking about the light, he's talking about the light of the 2 trees in the flashback to Valinor and young Galadriel. Like he could have been one of the elves living in Valinor when that happened. Back at the Watchtower, when Bronwyn gives them the big call to action about what they're facing, she references their true king. That's a reference to Halbrand. It's also kind of a reference to Sauron as well, because the old man, of course, he's the dissenting voice. He's the person who wanted Theo to come with him to serve Sauron and Adar. He called Sauron their true king. Soon our true king will return. Then this whole storyline with Isildur trying to become part of the faithful, the force that eventually goes to Middle-earth, I think is to create more of a morally gray backstory for him. They want to show that he has a little bit of darkness inside him because he winds up lying his way into the forces that go to Middle-earth. So even though they're portraying him as this very hopeful character, like he's meant to be a good character, obviously we know about the end of his story, there's this big fall from grace. He falls to the influence of the One Ring of Power. So during the series, we're just seeing Isildur on the way up. It's the fall from grace that the Peter Jackson movies cover. I think the reason Isildur's sister is making such a huge deal about not sending the faithful to Middle-earth isn't about her being anti-Valar or anti-elf, so to speak. I think it's more about her being afraid that her father and brother, and her other brother, who is in the show, they mentioned him, but we haven't seen him. She's probably afraid that they're going to die, and that's why she doesn't want them to go. It's not that she hates them helping Middle-earth. And they also show you more of Pharazôn's true intentions, like he pretends like he's going along with his wife Muriel, who's his cousin. They also reference that during the episode too. We're getting into Game of Thrones twincest territory here, marrying within the family. And one of the big things about his character, though, is that we really only know about some of the big plot points. Like we know that he is the person who ordered the attack on Valinor and led to the downfall of Númenor. He fell to Sauron's influence, listened to his advice, and served Morgoth. But like that's about it. So the show is trying to expand on that, like show you how he eventually came to those decisions. What he actually did to eventually seize power on Númenor. That's his whole thing, like he's biding his time. He has this whole speech about following the tide, listening to the tides. He's waiting for his moment to pounce to seize power from his wife. We also find out that his aide is actually his son. It could be his son from before he married Muriel because he doesn't look like her that much. Their whole scene is loaded with foreshadowing for the downfall. He mentions tide rising and drowning a man. That is literally what happens during the downfall of Númenor. We just saw that in last week's episode. He reveals his grand plan is to use the coming war to position themselves better with the eventual rulers like the people of Middle-earth and use that against the elves to slowly push them out, eventually subjugate them. Like that's what he means when he says eventually we'll be the ones ruling the elves. He's like a slightly less chaotic version of Littlefinger on the show. We also find out that Halbrand got his wish, at least temporarily, working for the Forge Master. That was his whole thing in the first couple of episodes. He's also started wearing Númenorian clothing. The reason they asked for his help with the map and Adar's forces is because he's from the Southlands, so he knows the area, he knows where all the points of interest are, all the defensible positions. And that's basically where they're sending the Númenorians, to that particular area. They'll probably arrive just in the same way that Gandalf's reinforcements arrived during the Battle of Helm's Deep. Like just in time for the tide to turn. The only thing about this whole battle in the last 2 episodes with the tower is that we know that Mordor is eventually going to be created, so eventually Adar will be successful. Eventually Mount Doom has to erupt, Sauron has to return and be successful. So we think what's probably going to wind up happening the last couple of episodes, just based on what they're foreshadowing here, is that the Númenorians, Meteor Man will arrive to help them, but they'll just barely rescue the Southlanders who are at the tower, but ultimately they'll lose the Southlands to Adar. Like Adar will be successful, Mount Doom will erupt at the end of the season. It'll be like a big WTF cliffhanger. But they spend most of the episode with Galadriel trying to win over Halbrand. And even though the show's using him as like a version of Aragorn, like the reluctant king, I think he's meant to be much more of a tragic character than Aragorn was because of what eventually does happen in the timeline with the creation of Mordor and Sauron's return, and the creation of the Nazgul, the 9 kings of men. They had that short scene of Galadriel teaching the other Númenóreans some orc fighting skills, just meant to show you some of her battle tactics. You have to remember she was commander of the elven armies in the north, and she's been alive for thousands of years, so she's had a long time to practice her skills. They also try to show you a little bit of Halbrand's skills too. Like, we haven't actually seen him in battle, but I believe that we'll see that the last couple of episodes. Like, he does actually have some skills. Up in the tower, Miriel's father, the previous king, Tar Palantir, keeps talking about the coming darkness, which is another reference to Sauron and the downfall of Númenor. When we go back to Meteor Man and he's fixing himself using another spell, the ice spell, the language that he's whispering is in Quenya, the language of the elves. And like I said earlier, he's just trying to heal his mortal body, but he goes a little too far. Like, he's just not used to taking this body for a spin, so to speak. It's like driving a new car. He's basically like this cosmic angel, this hugely powerful being trapped in a mortal body. Then during the scene of Durin with the elves, there's a whole bunch of Easter eggs and references. When he references the Noldor, those are the elves who answered the call of the Valar to journey to Valinor in the earliest of days. Most of the elves, when they were first created, came from this place over here. I explained this in my video last week when I talked about how the orcs were created. So Morgoth actually found the elves here before the Valar did. He stole some of them and turned them into the orcs, which is one of the reasons why I think that Adar cares about them so much and why they call him father, because he was probably related to some of those elves. So like, these orcs would literally be his descendants. When they reference the Khazad, that's obviously the group of people who created Khazad Dûm, the original Durin. They've changed some of the backstory behind the kings of Khazad Dûm. It's not like a traditional type of bloodline where like the son of the previous king becomes the next king. Durin's folk, this group of dwarves, have this belief about reincarnation of the original Durin, so each new king of Khazad Dûm becomes the person that they think is the reincarnation of Durin. They have this whole prophecy about how he's going to be reincarnated 6 times. When they mention Aule, that's the Valar known as the Smith who created the dwarves, like he literally created the dwarven race. He's also the Valar who Sauron studied craftsmanship under, so very relevant, because that's how Sauron learned to create the Rings of Power. Sauron's big skill, in addition to shapeshifting, he had a lot of magic as well as a Maiar, but his other major skill was in making things. They explain later in the episode, though, this whole sob story that Durin IV tells about the history of the table and the burial rites of their people, their monuments, was a whole lie just to stick it to them, like he was just having a little bit of fun with them. But then Gil-galad tells this big story about the original creation of Mithril and why the elves believe that they have an ancestral right to it that's much stronger than the claim the dwarves make to it. When he references the song, The Roots of Hithalgir, the Hithalgir is their word for the Misty Mountains, that's what they call them. And the legend is the creation of Mithril. He says that this ancient elf was trying to find one of the lost Silmarils, which was in a tree, and fought a Balrog for it. And it was the combination of the power of the Silmaril, the Balrog's dark power interacting with the tree, that created Mithril. So when they talk about the light shining in the Mithril, that's meant to be the light of the Silmarils. And Gil-galad's whole plan is to use the Forge to saturate the elves with this light to help preserve their realms and themselves. That's also how Sauron winds up tricking the elves into creating the Rings of Power, because that's literally one of the side effects of the rings, is preserving things. I also think that what they're trying to foreshadow is them using Mithril in the creation of the actual Rings of Power, like they use Mithril to forge the rings themselves. The whole thing with the blight that's affecting Lindon, like it's rotting the tree out here, like this is just the beginning. Eventually the rest of the forest in and around Lindon will look like this. Is meant to be a reference to the growing darkness of Sauron's return, like everything is slowly being perverted. Gil-galad also makes another huge Sauron reference when he mentions the Eye of Hope, like the Eye of Sauron. Sauron also offers the elves false hope, deceiving them into creating the Rings of Power. Then we see Pharazôn's son sabotaging the boat, although Isildur gets mixed up with it. Like I said, I think they're trying to show him being more morally gray, giving you an idea for why he would eventually fall to the influence of the One Ring. Like, when given the choice to end all potential for evil, why wouldn't someone throw that one ring of power into the fires of Mount Doom? Well, it's because he has a little bit of darkness in him. Then they give us another history lesson when Celebrimbor starts talking about Elrond's father. He reveals that he was there the night that Elrond's father set sail to Valinor, breaking the ban of the Valar in order to convince them to join the War of Wrath, which they did. It was successful, but it ended tragically for Elrond's father because he basically lived out the rest of his days sailing through the sky, just watching over, destined to never again set foot on the earth. Like the Valar had to punish him for what he did breaking the ban. Celebrimbor also mentions his mother. There's actually a statue of both his mother and father in the bay in Númenor. There's a story about how his mother was changed into a dove, I believe, by the Valar, and there's a dove on the statue's shoulder. That's meant to be his mother. The man is his father, he has a Silmaril in his forehead. But they're trying to give you this whole vibe with the elves here, like Gil-galad and Celebrimbor, that they're doing terrible things in the name of last resort. Like, everyone is getting a little bit dark because there's no other path that they can see to their goal. And it's all part of Sauron and Morgoth's plan, spreading the influence of evil around the world. Like, it's a slippery slope. You do one kind of bad thing, you do another bad thing, eventually you turn into a dark elf like Adar. Elrond also references that when he's talking to Durin at the end of the episode. Instead of breaking his oath, he convinces him to help give the elves Mithril. But it's when he's talking about what happens to the elves if their light actually does diminish in them. Like, their immortal souls will wither and they'll diminish into nothing more than shadows of themselves, which is a reference to Adar himself. Like, earlier in the episode, he was talking about the light within him, the warmth that he felt, diminishing eventually. And when he talks about the elves having to leave Middle-earth, eventually most of the elves do wind up leaving Middle-earth. Elrond himself eventually winds up leaving Middle-earth. But the whole thing with Durin agreeing to help the elves give them Mithril, I think is just a reference to them actually creating the Rings of Power. Like, eventually they do have to get their hands on Mithril somehow. Then Galadriel has this big call to action speech with Halbrand. He's afraid that he's falling to the same fate as his ancestors who served Morgoth. He references his own dark past and the terrible things he did to survive, which is kind of ironic because he talks about the other Southlanders casting him out. They'll hate what I've done, but like half of them literally just joined the forces of Sauron and Adar. So like half of them probably won't even care what he did. Galadriel's speech about touching the darkness in order to find the light is also a reference to what her brother told her when she was young. When he asked her what she knows of darkness, that's also a reference to what her brother did, the sons of Feanor, all the elven kinslaying. Like, there was a lot of dark things that the elves did, especially the sons of Feanor. Then they finally confirmed that Adar is not meant to be a version of Sauron, and they teased this weird relationship between him and Sauron, like he kind of hates Sauron, even though it seems like they're on the same side. When the old man swears his allegiance, he calls him Sauron, and Adar gets really pissed off. I think that's because the whole idea that just because they were all on the same side, they all served Morgoth. Like, the whole idea is that Morgoth is at the top of the pyramid of evil here. Sauron was just his chief lieutenant. He had other people following him. It sounds like Adar was one of them. But it sounds like all of Morgoth's generals just were not super best friends or anything like that, but they had all their own reasons for following him. So even though everything that Adar is doing seems like it's helping Sauron achieve his goal, it sounds like why he's really doing this is to benefit the orcs. Like, he's doing this all to give the orcs a place to live, because it seems like the only thing that he really cares about is the orcs themselves. And like I said, I think that gets into the original creation of the orcs, the way that Morgoth created them, how they used to be elves, and Adar being related to those original orcs. Why else would they call him father if not for that? So just a reminder that even though Sauron eventually winds up winning the day, so to speak, like eventually Mordor is created, Adar isn't doing this to directly benefit Sauron. He's doing this to benefit the orcs. Also, R.I.P. to Rowan, Theo's friend there. That's what you get for throwing in your lot with the forces of Morgoth. They also reveal Morgoth's sword is on a monument in the Elven Tower held by one of the ancient kings of the Southlands, probably Halbrand's ancestor that served Morgoth. And when he calls the sword a key, it's probably the key to making Mount Doom erupt, like covering the Southlands in ash, blotting out the sun, like Adar said in his evil guy monologue at the beginning of the episode. I think the whole idea is that Adar wants to take the blade, plunge it somewhere, place it somewhere magical, somewhere important, and that will cause Mount Doom to erupt, and they'll probably end the season on that like, holy crap, and then boom, slam to credits. We'll explain what happens next in Season 2. And when he references the ticking clock on this, like it could be days, moments before they attack, I think the idea is that it'll be like the last 2 episodes will be their version of the Battle of Helm's Deep at this particular tower, with the other forces like the Númenóreans and the Meteor Man showing up to help them by the end. He also references the sinking of Beleriand during the War of Wrath, which we saw in the first episode when he says whole continents sank during the war with Morgoth. You could also call that foreshadowing for the eventual downfall of Númenor, the sinking of Númenor. The horrors that he talks about the blade unleashing are probably literally the fires of Mount Doom. And at the end of the episode, they skip over Halbrand's meeting with Miriel, but they reveal that he did answer Galadriel's call to action. He's wearing Númenórean armor. The faithful depart. Isildur wins his place amongst them for his deception. Galadriel is also wearing her own different Númenórean armor. That's the Star of Eärendil on their chest. It's a Númenórean symbol. And they end the episode over the credits with that next song. Everyone post all your theories in the comments though, like where do you think they're taking this in the last couple of episodes? I think one of the other things that they're teasing is that by the end of Season 1, they'll finish the creation of Celebrimbor's Tower Forge. So like we won't actually see Sauron show up on the show physically either till like maybe a teaser at the end of Season 1 or during Season 2, and they won't actually create the Rings of Power themselves until into Season 2, Season 3, like some future season. If you spotted any other Easter eggs or references in the episode that I didn't talk about in the video, just write them below in the comments. In my full episode 6 video, we'll post next week after they release it. Everyone click here for my new House of the Dragon episode 6 video, and click here for my House of the Dragon Dance of the Dragons video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone stay safe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.